Today, I have the honor of having on my channel as a guest Alireza Nader, who is an old friend of mine from when we both worked at the RAND Corporation. He now, like me, is a more or less independent researcher. He's also somebody who's like an actual Iran expert. And I really, there are a lot of topics that I feel uncomfortable talking about, even though, like everybody else, I have my opinion. But I'm very cognizant of the fact that I'm not actually an expert on many things. Whereas Ali Reza, when it comes to Iran, really is. And Ali Reza is somebody who, I don't necessarily agree with or disagree with, but I have such respect for his opinion that whatever he says makes me think I got to stop and listen to it. And I need to take into consideration because he actually knows what he's talking about. Whereas, like most people in Washington, D.C., it's all about bloviation or what the word is. Anyway, Alireza, is there anything you want to add? Just introduce yourself about, I don't know.
Thanks for having me on. It's
Sure.
really good seeing you again and talking to you. It makes me remember the good days at Rand. I think we started both at the same time,
More or less. Yes.
more or less. Um, I just want to talk really about what's going on in Iran, what I think about the current US-Israel-Iran war. I know a lot of people are hoping that this war will lead to regime change in Iran. It's an objective many of us want. It's something I've been waiting for since I was a kid, since I was 10 years old and I left Iran. I've been waiting every day for this regime to end so I can go back to my homeland. And I've been trying to support the people of Iran as much as possible, especially since I first observed the first real major uprising, Bienveillantes, or regime overthrow uprising that happened in 2017. When I saw that uprising, people were chanting for the end of the regime. They were saying things like, no more reformists or hardliners, we're done with you people. And so I think we are witnessing maybe the last stages of this regime, I'm hoping. But I don't necessarily think this war will lead to regime change. And actually, as I observe the military campaign against Islamic Republic, uh, I'm becoming more alarmed that this regime will survive this war, will declare victory, although it has been battered militarily, that it will declare victory, tell the world, well, we can disrupt shipping in the Persian Gulf anytime. We can disrupt trade and commerce in the Persian Gulf anytime we want. And once this war is over and the United States has had enough of this war, the regime will again turn its wrath on the Iranian people, just like it did in January when it massacred 36,000 Iranians, one of the greatest massacres committed in modern history, a true horror show. This is what worries me, that this military campaign was not well planned, that the objectives keep changing, and that the regime, no matter how many of its leaders are killed, will survive this conflict.
How will the regime survive this conflict? I mean, survive the conflict. Like, what keeps the regime together?
Right. So this is a regime that, although it is despised by the vast majority of Iranians, and we can safely say that it is really despised,
Do you
it's
think
still,
that's true?
oh yeah, definitely. It is despised, but it still has a significant base of support. We can't forget that. That's just a reality. And, there are various estimates. 10 to 20% is, I think, a credible range. Even if it's on the low end, 10% of Iran's population is almost 10 million people. The regime has hundreds of thousands of people under arms. It has been preparing for this scenario since 2003, since the U.S. invasion of Iraq. I remember I used to run dozens of war games at the RAND Corporation for the Pentagon Air Force, done a lot of war games for the U.S. Navy. And the way this conflict has turned out is exactly what Pentagon war planners always feared, that they wouldn't be able to keep the Strait of Hormuz open because Iran is a very big country physically and in terms of population. It would be difficult to defeat the regime by air. There's really no precedent for regime change by air that I have found. There are no ground forces in Iran that can battle the regime. There was talk of mobilizing Iranian Kurdish forces to go into Western Iran. And I think that was potentially a good idea, actually. And that seems to have gotten nixed. And so the question is, how is this war going to end? What is the end goal? Let's say Mojtaba Khamenei's son is killed. He's not necessarily running the country. The Revolutionary Guards are running the country, and they have a deep bench. They have a pretty big military-industrial complex. They've been digging tunnels and underground bunkers for more than 2 decades with the help of North Korean engineers and others. They still have thousands of relatively cheap and small UAVs that can crash into skyscrapers in Dubai. So it's not clear to me how this war is going to end, and I fear that the U.S. is getting sucked into a quagmire, which may weaken the regime militarily for now, but will not necessarily overthrow it, and even may compel the regime to pursue nuclear weapons at a faster pace.
Mm-hmm. Does the war strengthen the regime?
No, I don't think it strengthens the regime. Perhaps its base has been mobilized. But this is a regime that can't run the country. Iran's facing a massive water crisis. Large parts of the country are literally sinking into the ground. Food supply is decreasing. I hear a lot of alarming stories about ships that are unable to unload their supply, especially food supplies, onto Iranian ports. So we could actually see hunger and state collapse in Iran.
Because of the war, this was going on beforehand?
It was going on beforehand. The water crisis has been in the making for decades, really because of the regime and not just drought or global warming. I've written actually several articles about the water crisis in Iran. If your viewers are interested, they're in foreign policy.
I'll put links to those in the description.
Yeah. I wrote it along with my friend Nick Kosar, who's a water expert. So this regime has literally destroyed Iran, and I do believe it's on its way out, but I worry that it can hold on for several months or even several more years, that it could evolve into something different. It's hard to imagine, but even more fascistic and violent. Mojtaba Khamenei is known to be more violent, and I don't know what the word is, crazier, vengeful than his father even. The people who have surrounded him in the Revolutionary Guards that he knows from the Iran-Iraq War are also fanatics. So no matter how many regime people the U.S. and Israel kill, there is always going to be this core base of fanatical Islamists who are devoted to the regime. That even people inside the regime may not be happy with the situation. A lot of people were unhappy with Khamenei. I think there is a struggle for power within the regime as well that we have to watch very closely. But so far, I haven't seen major signs of defections or major signs of infighting that we could say would collapse this regime. And I believe even there was a report from the Rand Corporation a long time ago that discussed regimes that are essentially coup-proof or uprising-proof or revolution-proof. And I don't want to say that the Islamic Republic can't be overthrown through a popular uprising. There have been many in Iran, but this regime is all about survival. They've been working on surviving this fight for really 47 years, at least, since the beginning of the regime in 79.
So, this is a question, I'm asking about Iran, but it's also a question that comes up with other topics. As you know, I work a lot on Africa, and there's always the question of whether or not the U.S. government should work with the junta, whatever the junta is, or out of pragmatism or realism, or if it should try to cultivate democracy. And often I wonder, how do you even do that? How does a foreign country cultivate democracy? So let's agree we have as an objective, we want the Iranian regime to go away. And to be replaced by something more benevolent and more peaceable, whatever that might be. Is there anything that the United States, as an outside country, it's another country, can do to hasten that moment? And if so, what? Like, Should it? Could it? And then what would that even look like?
I think for the United States, the main priority is a nuclear program and Iran's military capabilities and
Mm-hmm.
it's for terrorism. And that's the same case for the Israeli government. I think the Israeli government would love for the regime to be overthrown. But how realistic is that? I mean, who's going to take over? Even though Pahlavi has some support within Iran and outside of Iran, and you could argue he has significant support, it doesn't mean that he or his people are ready to go and to do anything. And I know Pahlavi and his people really well, and it's really their activities are just a show to gain foreign support. So I think the U.S. and Israeli objective of degrading Iran's nuclear and military capabilities, you can argue, has been somewhat successful. In terms of overthrowing the regime, I see no signs of that happening. I don't think just hitting IRGC and besieged paramilitary forces and their headquarters is going to get rid of the regime. And when Iranians came into the streets in January, they were massacred. And these are unarmed protesters. So how are unarmed protesters supposed to storm government buildings? And that's why I think this whole operation has been very poorly planned. Now, can the U.S. do something to facilitate democracy in Iran? As an Iranian American, I'm a big supporter of democracy for Iran. I think Iranians are ready for it, have the capability to create a relative democracy in Iran. They've been fighting for democracy since the 1905 constitutional revolution, which was a very progressive movement at that time. The Woman Life Freedom Uprising in 2022 was a very progressive movement in Iran. Some argue it was really the most progressive movement since in the last 150 years in West Asia, even. And when I say progressive, I don't mean the American context, right? In terms of Iran granting all its citizens, especially women, equal rights. That's what I mean by progressive. I think Woman Life Freedom had a great chance of succeeding. And I think Reza Pahlavi deserves a lot of blame for sabotaging it. And I was with him and his senior staff when they sabotaged it by having him drop out of the Georgetown coalition and then declaring him the leader of the opposition. And unfortunately, when I knew Pahlavi, when I met him 9 years ago, right after actually I left RAND, I met Pahlavi. I wrote about this story in my Substack. But when I knew Pahlavi, his message was very different. He talked about liberal democracy, tolerance, and now his movement has turned into this ultra-nationalist, far-right, very chauvinistic movement. If you just watch their recent rally in Munich, they literally had fascist slogans like one leader, one flag, one nation. Somebody was saying this in Munich, and also I think Vienna, and I think technically it's illegal to say that in those countries. I could be wrong, there's specific laws, but, and I posted a lot about how this movement has turned into an almost fascistic movement on X. There was even a video of a Canadian Iranian embracing a man with the flag of the Savak, the Shah's police. That to me is very alarming because the Savak was responsible for the torture and execution of thousands of Iranians. And when the Islamic Republic came to power, Khomeini basically took over the Savak, took over its senior personnel and changed the name to Ministry of Intelligence. So we're still dealing with the after effects of the Shah's authoritarian rule. And I don't want something like that for Iran, because these same people who want to bring back this Savak have also threatened the life of people like me. I'm very wary of things the U.S. and the Israeli government, the current Israeli government, have done to promote democracy in Iran, because I fear it's having the opposite effect.
Can you make the argument that if Pahlavi has some legitimacy and some popularity in Iran, that practically speaking, pragmatically speaking, that's the horse to bet on in terms of if you're trying to get rid of the current regime? Like, is that the shortest route of doing so? Or like, is it you don't like it because that's not a satisfying outcome. And as an Iranian American, you want a different future for Iran. But can you also argue that maybe it's a lesser evil? Like,
The issue is Pahlavi has a higher profile, but he's also the most divisive of the opposition figures. So his movement, his senior advisors especially, have made enemies with lots of people. They insist that only monarchists are legitimate, the legitimate opposition to the Islamic Republic. One of his senior advisors, even a former colleague of mine at FDD, even said, you're either with Reza Pahlavi or the Islamic Republic. So that is not an answer to building a coalition and becoming the leader of the opposition. The Pahlavists are also very adamantly opposed to Iranian Kurds, not just politically, but in terms of ethnicity. There's a deep hostility from the Pahlavists toward the Iranian Kurds, who form 10 to 13% of Iran's population. And Iranian Kurds also have the best organized and best armed of the opposition groups. So that's one group they've made enemies with. They made enemies with much of the intelligentsia in the diaspora, democratic-minded people such as myself, you name it. Even I talked to a lot of constitutional monarchists who want monarchy in Iran, and they are disappointed with Pahlavi. They're deeply suspicious of his people, who, by the way, actually were Islamist reformists in Iran and campaigned for regime officials and politicians. So all around, there's suspicion of this group. And I think once the regime is gone, Pahlavi is going to have a really hard time building the coalition he already had before the Women Life Freedom uprising. A lot of people won't trust him. I won't go near him or his people ever again, frankly.
So the idea is somebody who's more interested in coalition building, in building
Well,
a
not
broad
just one
coalition.
person. Iran is a very big country. There are almost 93 to 95 million people inside of Iran, and an estimated 5 to 7 million Iranians in the diaspora. It's a multi-ethnic country. It's multi-religious. There are a lot of people who are secular, atheists, lots of newly converted Christians, liberals, conservatives. No one person can represent all of Iranians. No matter how much support that person may have, they won't have the majority support of the population. That's why you need either a political coalition, leadership council, parties that can work together eventually in a free Iran, but really a political system that works. That's what Iran has never had. It has never had a political system that can represent the will of the Iranian people. That's something the 1905 constitutional revolution sought. But after that, you either had authoritarian shahs or the totalitarian Islamic Republic in Iran. And so Iranians have never had a chance to even choose their own destiny. And that is the problem. And that's a big problem with Pahlavi as well, because he is counting on foreign support, really the support of the Netanyahu government in Israel to bring him to power. He and his group tried very hard to convince President Trump to meet with them at the White House. I know the Israeli government pushed that really hard, but Trump doesn't respect him. He's called him a very nice guy, which is pretty much the kiss of death coming from President Trump. So I don't think it's going to happen.
Yeah, for better or for worse, Trump is often, well, I would say he's resistant to, because he falls for his own, like, there often are these favored, charismatic people that he somehow is resistant to. But of course, he might then fall for some other person for no particular reason. But because I remember the whole Iraq debacle with, what's his name, Shalabi. And, and I feel like, thank God we're not doing that again. There's not an Iranian Shalabi who's got the ear of Washington and influencing it to do all sorts of crazy things.
And, it's funny. I think that's one of the reasons the Trump administration has avoided Pahlavi, because there's this big sensitivity, especially within the GOP and the MAGA movement, toward Chalabi-like figures who supposedly drag America into wars. And so I think that's one of the reasons Pahlavi hasn't had a meeting. The other is, I've heard the White House thinks his operations are a clown show. They don't take him seriously. And I just don't think he has a persona. In person, he doesn't come across as a charismatic, authoritative figure, like his grandfather, Reza Shah, was. He's completely the opposite of his grandfather and even his father. So that's, I think, one reason among many that Trump just was not impressed with him.
Oh, so you you mentioned the diaspora, and I've seen this. People talk about this a lot, also, like on social media, about whether or not the diaspora. This is true for other countries too, like diaspora Palestinians versus those in the country diaspora. This right? Is there a? I'm going to use French for décollage. Like, is there a real separation between sort of diaspora Iranians and Iranians who are still in the country in terms of perspectives and what it is you want, that we as outsiders, non-Iranian, should be wary of, because we only interact with diaspora Iranians?
Yes. I think everybody should be wary of any Iranian who says that they speak for the people of Iran, who say things like, Iranians love this war, or Iranians hate this war. It's much more nuanced than that. And no Iranian outside of Iran speaks for the entire country. You have to consider also that life is very different outside of Iran than it is inside of Iran. Life inside Iran is extremely difficult. Day-to-day life is almost impossible for many people. And unless you have experienced that yourself, you're not going to understand it. And one reason also that I'm really opposed to this war is I've lived through aerial bombings in Tehran during the Iran-Iraq war, and it traumatized me for life. I'll never forget what I experienced. Our street was bombed, damaged our house. I think we were lucky actually to survive. And just war is a horrible thing. People say, may make claims on paper that it's going well, but as a civilian who's lived in Tehran, I'm just very skeptical of these aerial campaigns. They just bring death and destruction. I think what was happening before this war was much more effective. And if you recall, in January, when the major uprising started, started in the Grand Bazaar of Tehran. The merchants went on strike because of the currency crisis. It snowballed into massive strikes and peaceful protests, independently of Reza Pahlavi. And then Pahlavi was heavily promoted by Iran International, which is essentially a Pahlavi PR shop at this point. The nature of the uprising really changed. And after Pahlavi told people to go into the streets and storm regime institutions and government buildings, the massacre took place. Now, of course, Khamenei and his fascist regime are responsible for that massacre, but I do believe that Pahlavi acted very irresponsibly as well. He was telling Iranians to go into the street on January 11th, while the massacres had already taken place on January 8th and 9th. And so I think Iran International and Reza Pahlavi have not been truthful with the Iranian people. They have really pushed his political agenda at the cost of the truth. And that has also been very hurtful when it comes to the effort to get rid of this regime.
Did Trump's red line make things worse or better, or was it irrelevant?
Well, Trump should have never called Iranians to come into the streets and take over government buildings. People in Iran really listen to that. They take those signs and sayings very serious, especially when it comes from Trump and Pahlavi and is being blasted into Iran round the clock by Iran International. Once Trump said come into the streets and people were massacred, you can make an argument that he had no choice but to conduct military attacks. Frankly, I thought he would do something more symbolic instead of going for this full-out war. And I don't think this conflict was well thought out because of that. That's one of the reasons.
Do you think that might have been more effective? A symbolic thing, perhaps, at the time, like in January?
Yeah, yes, exactly. That would have been more effective as symbolic military strikes, and then helping the opposition, even helping it unite in some ways, helping solve the problem of Pahlavi, because I think really stands in the way of the opposition becoming united. And I think the Netanyahu's support for Pahlavi has also been very detrimental because his group has acted in a very authoritarian manner and has tried to shut down debate and dissent. This is not good for future Israeli-Iranian relations, frankly, because what if a government comes into power in Iran which is deeply hostile toward Pahlavi? Just going to remember who backed him and waged war against Iran in his name. So I don't think any of these goals or objectives were very well thought out. I see a lot of disorganization in Washington, D.C., not just from the Iranian opposition and the Pahlavists, but also from the Trump administration, frankly. I worked years on running war games for the Pentagon, and I think this is a big mess, frankly. I can't imagine anybody at the Pentagon who thinks this war is going well. We would have to have a very big debate about it if that's their claim.
I feel like everything that's happened has been totally predictable. I mean, closing the
Yeah.
strait, the ballistic missile attacks, everything. It's like, of course this is the way it would go. So was it planned? Was it considered?
Or even, if you want to control the Strait of Hormuz, you have to land troops on the Iranian side. I mean, is that something the United States ready for, to land thousands of American troops, which would, by the way, give Iran the comparative advantage because then it could hit those troops with hundreds of thousands of, they may be poorly armed, but they can shoot guns.
Yeah.
So they've been training for invasion for decades. And having known all of this, and the U.S. military knows all of this inside and out, why did the U.S. go to war? To do what exactly? Overthrow the regime from the air? It just seems very implausible.
I think they were just counting on there being a rebellion because they told themselves the idea that the Iranian people were ready for this and wanted this to happen. And that's would take the opportunity.
Well, that happened in January and people were massacred. So that should have been a lesson learned right there.
Right.
Unarmed Iranian protesters, regular people like you and me living in Tehran are not going to be able to defeat a fascistic, highly armed regime that's willing to kill everybody in sight.
So, we already talked about there's no Shalabi. I mean, there's maybe the Pahlavi and Pahlavists, but like where does this idea come from? The certainty come from? The certitude that the Iranian people are primed for rebellion and we just need to blow a few things up and that's going to happen.
What I suspect, and I've heard this from several Israeli analysts that I respect, so it's not just coming from American analysts, but Israeli analysts as well who understand the issue. One analyst said that Netanyahu's goal, that there were several scenarios he would have been okay with. Once the attack happened, once the aerial campaign started, if the regime fell, he would have been fine with that. But if it didn't matter because the Israeli government's priorities are to degrade Iran's nuclear capabilities and its conventional military capabilities as well. But Israel really needed the American military to join that campaign. And to some extent, that has succeeded. Iran's nuclear and military capabilities have been degraded. I don't think enough to prevent the resurgence of a threat from Iran. I think they could still go for nuclear weapons. Mm-hmm. We may be very well able to stop it. It won't be easy for them to assemble.
I worry about this because how do you even know when enough is? Yeah. Like, what's the metric?
I don't have no idea. Nobody's provided them for me, Michael. Right. Nobody, as far as I can tell from the Pentagon, has come out and said it. Nobody from political leadership in D.C. has defined it. It just seems like a very confusing and confused conflict with a lot of civilian deaths. Fuel depots used by the Revolutionary Guards were bombed in Tehran. I think that was a disaster because it spread this toxic, black, acidic cloud all over the city. Tehran is already highly polluted, high rates of cancer, asthma, you name it. And so how is that a success? You blew up these plants and the regime is still there. For all we know, they could be all hiding underground. If Hamas was able to last the Gaza conflict, I mean, think Iran is how many times bigger, more resourceful, And they've been building those tunnels since 2003, at least, because I remember that being a top concern for U.S. military planners, all the
Right.
ground facilities.
This is something that's been bothering me every time I read about we've bombed this besieged headquarters. Like, it's probably an empty building at this
Yeah,
point.
it
I
is.
mean,
Yeah.
so what? You bombed a building. It would
Right.
be.
They're,
It
they're
isn't
hiding,
stupid, right? You're not gonna like hang out in this building that's already, been geolocated.
and those, their IRGC also builds their installations near schools. For example, the bombing of the school where I think more 160 school children died, little girls. The IRGC builds these installations near schools and mosques. Sometimes it places weapons. A lot of times in mosques, actually. We've seen images of protesters in Iran burning mosques. I would never condone that. You should never attack religious places of worship. But the Basij and the Revolutionary Guards use religious institutions for military purposes. So just imagine if Hamas was able to withstand the Israeli military campaign against it. You could argue that eventually it lost, but Iran is a very different ballgame. This could continue for years and years, frankly. And Iran could interdict shipping in the Persian Gulf intermittently for months, if not years. So I feel like the US and Israel have opened up a Pandora's box, and we don't know what to do now. We don't know how to end this war.
I feel like the war should only have been done if there was a real plan. Well, there are many things I would have wanted in place.
Yeah.
One of them is a real concrete plan for what to do about Hormuz and the Strait and how to cope with that. And even if at the very least stockpiling and telling everybody to stockpile and do it carefully. Like on one hand, it's like we didn't attack in January where I feel like there might have been a window.
Yes.
You got to wait to get the ducks in a row. Well, there are a lot of ducks that didn't get put in a row. So one of them might have been coming up with some real plans for how to deal with the Strait of Hormuz.
Right. Or even, go ahead, please.
Well, it's also, there's this issue about like how do you topple a government from afar, and I think you and I both agree that you can't do it by bombing. There's just not, an aerial campaign doesn't do it. Countries have been overthrown by other countries. That's happened.
Right.
But it involves careful planning, involves working with elements within the country and coalitions, and some combination of subversion and clandestine stuff and overt stuff. And there's a lot of things that you got to do to put in place to even have a shot at it, but it can be done.
Exactly. It has to be like a very well thought out campaign, right? Even like when the aerial strikes against Iran started and there was talk of mobilizing the Iranian Kurds, I was a little more hopeful at that time because I thought, well, now we can have boots on the ground, and the Iranian Kurdish groups know their territory really well. They're Iranian. They know the country very well. And they have fought the regime for decades. But then the Pahlavists started attacking the Kurds as ethnic separatists. And I saw others also, including the Pahlavists' Israeli allies, repeat this false charge. And so I think that had an impact. You're mobilizing public opinion against the Iranian Kurds who can fight the regime. Well, guess what? There's nobody left then besides them to fight the regime because Pahlavi can't do anything. And you just made enemies of the group that could have really helped you.
Right. So if you wanted to bring the Kurds in, you have a long plan that's thought out and that's already in motion. And I didn't see any sign of that. It was more
and possibly combined with the air campaign, combined with people coming into the streets. But that didn't happen. It just seemed very disorganized and poorly thought out, and with different phases contradicting each other. I'll give you one example. For example, what really actually aggravates me and frustrates me is this campaign launched by Iran International for Pahlavi, where they ask people to scan a QR code being broadcast into Iran that would take into a Google Doc, and people would be able to register their names as defectors. And it's such a clumsy,
it's really dangerous,
irresponsible campaign. But based on that, Reza Pahlavi repeatedly said that he had attracted 50 to 100,000 regime defectors. Again, when you put out that information, people in Iran could believe that because Iran International is broadcasting and is being backed by the US government. Pahlavi, who has a significant base of support in Iran, is telling people that this is true, and people make decisions based on that. And so this showed what a poorly thought and clumsy campaign this has been. And I see all of this as being part of one campaign because you have the same players involved: Pahlavi, Iran International, elements of the Israeli government, and the Trump administration, not even working cohesively, but it seems at times working against each other. And this is what worries me. The clumsiness of it is going to mean that the regime stays in power and kills more Iranians and disrupts shipping in the Persian Gulf and does other terrible things. One thing we haven't talked about, what if the regime reconstitutes itself and launches a really nasty campaign of international terrorism? So there are a lot of possibilities that really were not thought through by.
I'm kind of surprised that hasn't quite happened. I mean, there have been attacks here and there, which may or may not have anything to do with the Iranian government. But I frankly I expect Amia bombing level sorts of.
Yeah, it could happen, right? That could be the next level of their escalation to blow up, a truck bomb in Dubai.
Right, exactly.
People on the other side of the Persian Gulf. They have tons of people in the UAE. They could mobilize them. I believe there are reports of Revolutionary Guards being arrested in Qatar, but even in Bahrain, there were Bahraini regime riots, so pro-Iran riots in Bahrain after Iran attacked Bahrain. So the Persian Gulf countries are not completely stable either. There are a lot of things Iran can do to affect the stability of those countries at a very basic societal level, even.
Well, certainly cutting off their economic lifeline already makes them vulnerable.
Yeah. And well, just like Bahrain having a big Shia population that it treats poorly makes it vulnerable to Iranian meddling. I think Bahrain, out of all those countries, is more vulnerable. But even look at Oman after Iran attacked Oman. Oman's foreign minister just blamed Israel for everything, right? So the political and economic dynamics in the Persian Gulf are really nuanced. It's not just a case of Iran versus the GCC states. A lot of those GCC states are dependent on Iran and vice versa. So by hitting Iran, in a lot of ways, you're also hitting those states.
Absolutely. So what next? What happens?
What appears to me to be happening is that the war could be winding down. There's a lot of pressure on the Trump administration to end the war. The Israeli government, of course, doesn't want that. And is making the arguments that this regime could fall. I don't see that happening anytime soon. Again, I wish it was true. If there was an aerial campaign with the right components and right planning that could overthrow a regime, I would be 100% behind it. I would actually have loved to plan that myself. It's something I've been thinking through for years, especially since I moved to Washington, D.C. as a kid. But that is not happening. And so I feared that the war will end and the regime will survive, and it might just even be nastier in the future. I hope not.
I've seen the argument made, and I don't know what to make with this, that, like I think the Israeli objective or hope is that the war doesn't end before you've gotten in as many kicks as you possibly can to the nuclear ballistic missile program, just done enough damage. And even if you just damage it a lot, that's already something. You're better off than not. I look at that and I'm leery about that because I'm like, okay, so maybe that buys you 5-10 years, but in the end of the day, we're back to where we started. It's kind of like mowing the lawn or something.
Right. Mowing the lawn is the term I've used, actually. That actually I picked up from Rand because people at Rand talked about that regularly when I worked there, that the best strategy, not everybody at Rand, some analysts, the best strategy was to mow the lawn periodically.
It's an unsatisfying strategy. Right. I mean, like people say, for instance, October 7th was a failure of 20 years of Israeli mowing the lawn. Like the Israeli approach to managing Hamas was all about periodically like mowing the lawn. and it doesn't solve anything. It just manages anything. So there's a desire to solve something, to decide whatever the conflict might be. And I feel like that's part of the Israeli motive for really going into Gaza. Just hope that we can finally decisively settle this. As it turns out, they haven't. They failed. The temptation to do the same in Lebanon is clearly strong, although we have every reason to think that that's going to go about as well as it did in Gaza. But I understand the temptation. Enough with the managing of the problem. Let's finally lance the boil and get this thing done and over with. But you can't.
Yeah. I also think, part of it is this Israeli government is becoming addicted to what it does best, bombing things from the air. Like nobody matches Israeli air power in the Middle East. And Israel has degraded Iran's military capabilities substantially. But it's mow the lawn campaign, if you want to call it that, also endangers other, I think, more important objectives like regime change in Iran. I fear that the Netanyahu government has decided who cares about regime change as long as Iran can't hit us. We don't need necessarily a regime change as long as Iran is weak. Even if there's state collapse or civil war in Iran or ethnic separatism. And there are a lot of figures in Israel and even in DC who have advocated these scenarios for years and years. And also, I think the Israeli government or the Netanyahu government is using Pahlavi as an instrument, frankly, that they know he's not going to become the Shah. He doesn't have the capability to become the leader of the opposition. But when people are needed to come into the streets, they can ask Pahlavi to provide that.
It's really
but
possible.
What has that done?
I think it's also possible that some have actually just committed themselves or actually convinced themselves that this is actually a viable option.
It's like, and I know Israelis who do think he's a viable option. I've had arguments with them. Look, Pahlavi is very popular in Israel and in general among Iranian Jews, and I understand the reason for that because Iranian Jews had a much better life relatively under the Pahlavis than they ever have had since probably Cyrus the Great in Iran. So I understand why Pahlavi is popular. I understand why people support him. I used to support him once, but we have to be also realistic. What are we losing in supporting him? He's divided the opposition. He, quote unquote, leads a pretty scary group right now that is threatening people and actually has attacked people. And I talked about Masoud Masjoudi, the Pahlavi critic who was murdered in Canada. We don't know who murdered him. Two very committed Pahlavists have been arrested. They have threatened him in the past. And Masoud Masjoudi was revealing a lot about this movement. So there are a lot of scary things happening with this movement. Is this the kind of opposition group that the Israeli government really wants to support from now on? I think the costs are greater than the benefits.
I guess that's the debate, right? Which is the lesser evil here? Or I don't know. I'm just glad I don't have to make those decisions. I'm just an armchair analyst. I don't know.
But I think that the Israeli, but I think really the Israeli policy of smash and go is long-term really terrible. Because there are a lot of Iranians who want friendship with Israel. They want a partnership with Israel. I know a lot of them. I've written about this topic quite a bit. I've advocated for Israeli-Iranian friendship and peace. But will this lead to that? I'm very skeptical of right now. And I hate to say it, but it's just sad, but it's what I see to be the truth.
Excellent. Well, thank you. Do you have anything to add? Any questions I didn't ask?
No, this was a very good conversation. That was good. That was a very good conversation. I think we covered a lot of our bases, especially when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz. I think that's really one key challenge that the U.S. is going to have a very hard time in solving militarily.
It just kills me because everybody knew this.
Yeah, it kills me too.
Everybody knew this. There's nothing new here. There's no...
Especially when you've been working on it for years. I mean, I can't tell you how many war games I participated with this exact same scenario.
Yeah. And it's not about the Navy. It's not about the Iranian, it's like all those anti-ship missiles that the Iranians have. Like you can just fire them off of trucks and play cat and mouse with the U.S. Air Force and getting them all and getting rid of that risk. And because of the way the insurance companies work and
Oh,
all
yeah.
that, like, if the Iranians could just hit one tanker every other time, like, you don't have to kill them all. You just have to kill one every once in a
One.
while, and that shuts it down because everybody's so risk averse.
And they have those suicide boat drones too.
Yeah, yeah.
And they haven't used all of them. It seems like to me they've been kind of selective.
I'm sure these aren't stupid people, IRGC and the like, we don't like them, but you got to respect them. And I'm sure they're keeping their powder dry, and I'm sure they're keeping a lot of these things in storage safe.
Yes, I think so too.
And, right, as you've said, they planned this out. They have war gamed it and actually probably taken seriously the conclusions of the war gamers. I want this to work. I want the regime to fall, but I also want the nuclear threat to Israel to go away. I want Hezbollah to go away. I want all these things. Imagine how great Lebanon would be if Hezbollah went away.
Oh, sure, thefinitely.
Yeah, or if there'd be peace between Lebanon and Israel, and like, God, what a great, there'd be this flourishing. It'd be phenomenal. Iran, and it would be great. It would be great.
And we could get there in the future. I have not lost hope in the long term, but
long term.
We're going through a very dangerous, uncertain territory right now, and nobody can predict what's going to happen, and it could turn into even a bigger disaster, frankly. If there's state collapse in Iran, millions of refugees will have to leave Iran and head toward Europe and America, and that could very well happen.
Nobody wants that. Okay. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for taking the time to
Thanks for having me.
For me.